Hello and welcome to our cybersecurity presentation on CWE 306, Missing Authentication for Critical Function. My name is Aspen Call,
And my name is David Gang.
and let's get started.
So CWE 306 is a software weakness. It usually occurs when the software doesn't perform the authentication for a function that would normally require it, or is considered a critical function. It was 20th on the CWE's top 25 most dangerous software weaknesses, which is down from 2 places from last year. However, the reasoning is unclear. It doesn't seem to be anything related to 306 directly. It was also 10th on the CWE top 10 KEV weaknesses, as it's easy to execute and a known exploit.
The rank in 2022 for top 25 most dangerous software vulnerabilities was 18, while in 2023 it was 20. It's unclear exactly why the ranking of CWE 306 went down, but many factors come into play as to why a weakness might go down in ranking, such as vulnerabilities reported each year, changes to the remapping strategy, and new CWE entries entering the list, and more.
So it was ranked 10th on the KEV list. Has been assigned a CWE identification number 306. Has had an attempted exploitation or successful exploitation, but there is no publicly known examples of anyone actually using it as an attack. Just more of it's come up in a lot of reports. It has also had a clear action for affected organization to take, implementing authentication methods to try and fix the weakness.
This weakness has also appeared in the OWASP top 10 category A07 2021, which is uh, identification and authentication weaknesses. These authentication weaknesses include permitting automated attacks such as credential stuffing, where the attacker has a list of valid usernames and passwords, permitting brute force or other automated attacks, permitting default weak, well-known passwords such as password1 or admin, and much more. In some ways to prevent the attack, it is where possible, implement multi-factor authentication to prevent automated credential stuffing, brute force, and stolen credential reuse attacks. Not shipping or deploying with any default credentials, particularly for admin users. And implementing weak password checks, such as testing new or changed passwords against the top 1,000 or top 10,000 worst passwords lists, and more. And some examples of attack scenarios. The first one is credential stuffing, which is the use of lists of known passwords, is a common attack. Suppose an application does not implement an automated threat or credential stuffing protection. In that case, the application can be used as a password oracle to determine if the credentials are valid. Scenario 2, most authentication attacks occur due to the continued use of passwords as a sole factor. Once considered best practices, password rotation and complexity requirements encourage users to use and reuse weak passwords. Organizations are recommended to stop these practices per NIST 800-63 and use multi-factor authentication. In the third scenario, application session timeouts aren't set correctly. A user uses a public computer to access an application. Instead of selecting log out, the user simply closes the browser tab and walks away. An attacker uses the same browser an hour later, and the user is still authenticated.
So 306 is considered a base weakness, and base weaknesses are typically defined uh, with 2 or 3 dimensions. The dimensions being behavior, property, technology, language, and resource. If if defined with more or less than 2 or 3, it changes the classification either to variant if you use more, or class if it's less defined.
CWE 306 is a child of the improper authentication weakness which is CWE 287, which happens when an actor claims to have a given identity and the product does not prove or insufficiently proves that the claim is correct. CWE 306 fits into this category because it happens when the product does not perform any authentication for a provable identity, which qualifies as not proving that the identification claim is correct. CWE 306 is also a parent of both CWE 288, authentication bypass using an alternate path or channel, and CWE 322, key exchange without entity authentication. CWE 288 occurs when a product requires authentication, but the product has an alternate path or channel that does not require authentication. The alternate path or channel that doesn't require authentication itself falls under the CWE 306 weakness definition. CWE 322 occurs when the product performs a key exchange with an actor without verifying the identity of that actor. The lack of verification in this description counts as an instance of missing authentication.
So there's a huge surge of reports of CWE 306 in 2002, one of them being the Honeywell Experian LX Epic Mo protocol. The protocol did not have any authentication features, allowing any attacker capable of communicating with the ports in question to invoke the desired functionality. The attacker was able to issue firmware download commands, potentially allowing for firmware manipulation and reboot, causing denial of service. Additionally, there was the JTEC Toyo Puck PLC CMP link TCP protocol, where, similar to the Honeywell, it just didn't have any authentication features, but it also did not separate its privileges into separate layers. Yeah.
CWE 306 has dire consequences on the security requirements. For confidentiality, anyone can view information that they aren't authorized to. For integrity, potential attackers can get into a system and change or delete data. And as for availability, anyone can gain access to critical controls and deny service to users.
So we have two examples. Example one would be an attacker deciding to create an admin account on an online banking website. They proceed to make an account, but the system doesn't actually bother to check if they're authorized to create such an account in the first place, and lets them do so. The attacker now has an admin account and can do whatever privileges were granted to an admin account, which could be disastrous in a banking setting. The second example would be an attacker decides to attack a local power plant grid by posing as an employee. The system, again, doesn't authenticate if the user's allowed to do so, and lets the attacker use employee-level privileges, which could lead to power outages as they decide to mess around.
For the facts of exploitation, one question that is raised is if physical access is required to exploit the weakness, which no, it's not needed, as the weakness is that the software does not authenticate the user's identity, which occurs in the software code. The exploit is that the authentication is missing, so physical access is irrelevant, as the protection that should be there is simply not. The exploitation can be done purely in software, as the exploit focuses on the fact that the software simply lacks authentication, meaning that exploiting it is just using the critical function without permission. And this exploit is applicable to any device with that software, assuming that all the devices have the same code and lack of authentication, as it is a lack of authentication implemented in the code itself.
So there's a bunch of detection methods that could be used to detect this weakness. They range from manual analysis, automated static analysis, manual static analysis, either binary or bytecode, dynamic analysis with automated results interpretation, dynamic analysis with manual results interpretation, manual static analysis of the source code, automated static analysis of the source code, architecture or design review, and detection isn't very common since it usually isn't too common to be implemented in the first place, but there was a huge surge of detections in 2022.
This weakness can be prevented by implementing an authorization process before allowing a user to do a critical function, and ensuring there is one for every function that requires it. As for methodologies to prevent this weakness, penetration testing, vulnerability assessments, and threat modeling would all likely quickly reveal this oversight in implementation.
So there's also a bunch of mitigation methods. First one being weakness usually appears during the architecture and design phase. So most of the strategies also revolve around making sure that it doesn't appear in those phases. Dividing the software into permission layers of anonymous, normal, privileged, and administrative areas, and then having important areas require authentication. If a security check occurs on the client side, ensure the checks are also copied on the server side. Discourage to implement custom authentication routines. Using a vetted library or framework that prevents this weakness from occurring in the first place to make sure it's already in place. And the weakness can still be mitigated once fielded, and the weakness does not require a hardware modification to fix. Just needs a software update in most cases.
And that concludes our presentation for CWE 306. Thank you for watching. See you next time.